Attention everybody, can y'all hear me? I want all of the police officers who are in uniform to raise your hand, including the ones on the roof. Can y'all see that? So, anybody ideas, wicked or criminal activity, they think that they want to perform, do us a favor and go to them right now so they can hand off your life. We have come too far to allow outsiders to come in here and tear down what we are building. As Felicia said, we understand that we got issues. But guess what? We don't need y'all to bring us no book. If y'all here to help us, show us love, and leave here in peace.
Hi, my name is Minno Bloom, and I am speaking today with for Cooperate Asbury and the Asbury Park Transformative Justice Project. Transformative justice is about changing systems, and specifically the Transformative Justice Project is a prison abolition project. So, you know, the things I'm going to say, I ultimately believe that I rather have community power than police power, that we need to transition, that we need to defund police and give money to housing, for food, for education and things like that. So anyway, as far as the protest that happened on Monday, I think it was a great event. I think the local organizers that did it did a fabulous job. They did a fabulous job centering Black voices, the people most affected by police violence in this country. I think there was 3,000 to 4,000 people that came. And at one moment it was very interesting, and I think the only thing that was sort of hard about the rally is there were so many people, and the sound equipment, people in the back couldn't really hear. So I think that's actually what happened when the march happened. I think after a while people couldn't hear, and they're like, you know what, we're just gonna march. And so people started marching south down Main Street towards Bradley. And what's interesting about this for Asbury Park, if you're in New York City, there's lots of unpermitted marches that happen, but in the 5 years that I've been here, I haven't seen an unpermitted march in Asbury Park. So an unpermitted or illegal march started to happen, or if you believe in the Constitution or First Amendment, people wanted to protest on the streets. And so we went, and again, it was interesting that the police allowed this to happen, even though that there was an unpermitted march. And some of the fascinating things that I saw during this, we went all the way down Main and came back towards Memorial and went up Springwood and Lake Drive, and went up to the boardwalk and took over the boardwalk, which I think was a really beautiful expression to talk about racial justice on the boardwalk, specifically because Asbury Park, I think, is about 50% Black folks, made up of 50% Black folks, 20 or so percent Hispanic folks, 20 or so percent white folks, and 1% Asian and Native American folks. But everyone was really represented on a boardwalk, which unfortunately is, people that come to our town feel like we live in a white city when they come to the the boardwalk or to Cookman. But it was multiracial, clearly speaking for justice, for police violence that, you know, just hasn't happened now. And I think it's really important. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a Black correspondent, wrote that police violence isn't new, the cameras are. So it's a really interesting moment in history because nothing has changed. And as the protests kind of came back down Fifth Avenue and to Fifth and Main, it was just really interesting. Protesters really started getting in with police and arguing and talking. And one of the things that I thought was really beautiful, there was this moment of, there's these young Black girls that might have been 16 or 17, and they would go up to the police officers that were multiracial, but mostly white police officers, and they would chant, "Take a knee, take a knee." And at first the police officers, I could see they kind of looked at them and they're like, just kind of ignored the women. And, but then eventually 1,000 other people came around the women and also started chanting, "Take a knee." And then all the police officers did take a knee. And I think the really interesting part of that dynamic is that these young black women who normally don't have all the power in the community and the police do have the power, that power dynamic switched. And these younger folks got to have the power over the police. So I thought that was kind of a beautiful moment in that story. And then eventually we marched back here, kind of right in front of me is the Asbury Park City Hall and Police Station. And there was basically two main groups that formed, and really they formed there. The local population was just kind of arguing with the police, almost from 8 to 10 p.m. Now during this whole time, it was kind of confusing because there was a curfew at 8 o'clock, but I didn't hear any dispersal calls really till 10 p.m., but evidently there was some. But everything was very peaceful from 8 to 10, and it was interesting because I sometimes think of how do we talk about police abolition? How do we talk about the people having more power in their communities rather than the police forces? And one thing I think is really interesting in a democracy is people vote for the politicians, but we have absolutely no say in who polices our communities and carries guns. And it just seems kind of like a wild concept, personally. Okay, so at this moment, it was really interesting, that 8 to 10 period in the parking lot after curfew. And from 8 to 9, I would say that it was mostly local police, a lot of Asbury Park police, and then some police from Point Pleasant, Bradley Beach, Belmar, which, still somewhat local police. And, I was quoted in the Asbury Park Press for saying I felt like the police were wildly professional. And what I mean by that is that multiple youth were cursing at the police, F-bombs, certain things like that, just showing their rage of what it means to be in a community and be policed. And I think, I grew up living in Philly and New York, and I easily would have seen police in Philly or New York arresting the youth. But I did see the Asbury Park police engage with them. And personally, I was wondering, why are people wanting to talk to the police so much, but the local black youth really wanted them to feel their pain and what it's like to be in an occupied community where every time you walk out of your house, you don't know what will happen, where the police took your mom or cousin or sister to prison, And people really just wanted the police to hear their anger. And specifically, a lot of black youth were talking to black police about, why are you police? I mean, so it was really important conversations that needed to be happening. And around 9 or 9:30, we did start seeing, I think, the riot police kind of came down from Madison here, right in front of or Bangs is this, right in front. And we can kind of see them in the background, but they were across the street. And then around 10 o'clock, and really, some of the black youth were high-fiving police. It was very interesting. It wasn't necessarily this anti-police march. And some people certainly were and some people weren't. Everyone had their different reason for being there. And then at 10 o'clock, the Asbury Park police started being like, okay guys, I think it's time to move. Let's go. And as we basically were okay, let's go. The riot police were now directly right in front of Bangs Avenue. And it was interesting. I talked to some of the youth during and after, and they felt betrayed. Here they're like, oh look, the cops are listening to, we're just having conversation. And yes, it was heated conversation, but I think when the youth saw these armed police that literally looked like they were militarized police coming for war, they felt betrayed. They're like, we're just talking, why are these armed police here? And then that's when things sort of got out of hand. People went up to them to be like, this is our community, why are you here? And I didn't really see what happened, but eventually people started pushing, and then 2 individuals were arrested. So what I saw is the 2 youth that, and again, we were so compacted, I couldn't see who was pushing who, but eventually people started getting pushed, and I saw the police officer arrest a young man, and then eventually a young woman. And really, I think it could have been contained. There's only 2 people. There was probably like 75 police and about 75 or so community members. But what happened is the cops that they just started pushing people back, and what I saw was the Asbury Park press person filming and just had his phone out, and I think one of the police officers something felt like they didn't listen to the call to dispersal and arrested him. But I didn't focus on the older person. I was staying with the youth at that moment, so I didn't really see the Asbury Park arrest. I just saw it briefly, but I was trying to de-arrest the young woman who was getting arrested. And again, when I say the Asbury Park police were being professional, that's not necessarily good or bad, because unfortunately, even the Asbury Park police who are good or bad, or the Asbury Park police officers that are nice, they're still perpetuating classism and racism because it's their job to police low-income communities. And a matter of fact, at one moment during the time together, I was talking to a white police officer from Bradley, and we were talking. He's like, "Why don't people like the police?" And I was like, "Well, even though you seem nice, you're complicit in racism and classism." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, you can be kind to people, but ultimately, what areas are you policing? Wealthy folks commit just as much crimes as low-income community members, but you only really police and arrest the low-income communities, or maybe not only, but at way higher rates than you do the wealthy folks." And even that police officer is like, "Well, that's kind of true." So whether you're a good or a bad police officer, you're still kind of supporting systemic violence. So just to be clear on that. But the police officers pushed back, saw me because I was there as well, and I was asking, I was like, "Hey, this woman, I think she just got pushed. It was confusing. Do we really need to arrest her?" And they're like, "Sir, you need to move back. You need to move back." And they certainly could have arrested me at any moment. But then that really, right on the corner of Bangs and Main, was really when the local police stopped being part of the picture for a little bit. And this is when the Riot police, full armed gear, the white, clear police shields, literally kind of marching like a military style, pushing the youth back. And I stayed with the youth. And we were going back, and eventually the police kind of came both ways at us in Maine, so pushed us down Monroe Street. And as we were turning the corner, one of the youth got hit in the head with a police brutality bat, or whatever you call them, and basically had a concussion. He was lightheaded, and I ended up kind of holding him and giving him water, which was pretty scary during Corona. But what I think needs to be put out into the media was the rocks weren't thrown until they saw their friend get arrested and they saw their other friend get hit in the head with a baton. That's when they started throwing rocks. And to be fair, it's very interesting that none of these riot police were from here, because it felt like there was an occupying military force in these youth's communities. So they were really just fighting back. And it was very scary. They basically, the riot police followed us all the way down Monroe, all the way to the southwest side. I almost walked all the way down to Prospect around 11 at night. And this also was around the same time as we were being pushed by the riot police on Memorial. The local police kind of came down Memorial on the side, and I think this is when the one police officer got hit in the head with the rock, which seemed to be meant for the riot police, but he came in from the side and got hit in the rock and then kind of fell on the corner. And then afterwards, police continued to kind of come towards the youth. And again, it was like right on Comstock and Monroe. And the police was driving somewhat fast towards the youth, and the youth were still kind of throwing and engaging in battle to protect their community. And then that's really kind of when everyone kind of split up. We got the person who had a concussion, made sure they got into their car and were safe. As soon as the police officer was hit in the head, and to be fair, it did go right down, the local police ran up to him and said, "Officer down, officer down." And all the local police went to them. And my memory, and again, things were intense. We were basically at a battle. The riot police did not move. And I think one thing that was interesting during the whole time was, for instance, a few other times during the when we were being pushed, I was able to talk to local police and de-arrest people. That the police had grabbed at one point and they were arguing and it looked like they were going to arrest, and I tapped a police officer and said, I do work for Trinity Church, Asbury Park. I'm here as like a peacemaker. You don't need to arrest these folks. And he's like, you can deal. I was like, I'll deal with it. And he left. And as a protester, I never tell protesters what to do or not to do, especially protesters of color. They should express the rage that they feel. It's not my job to police them. But because in my prior history and protests or really just walking down the street, I've had 3 separate times police put a gun right to my face. I've been kicked in the ribs and the head by police. I've been shot by rubber bullets. I've been gassed by police. So my mission is to really protect the community from police during a protest. And what I like in a world where the police are actually protecting the people, not property, yes. But my experience, if we're protesting the World Bank, which is maybe the most greedy bank that's ever been created, or we're protesting war, somehow the police is always systemically protecting those in power. But the riot police, going back to the rock, the police officer that got hit in the head with a rock, the riot police stayed in formation and continued to kind of slowly push us down Monroe Street. So I was just asked that would the violence have broken out if the riot police were not here? And of course this is just my opinion, but my perspective was that the youth really wanted to talk and feel heard from the police. That was what was happening, and that did happen. And we were leaving, but when they saw the riot police, the youth just felt betrayed because the riot police didn't look like they were there to keep the peace. They looked like they were there to confront violence, that they were here to, again, it was racializing people. It was like, at this point, it was mostly black folks and people of color on the street, and that's when the riot cops come, So I think people were immediately defensive. So I truly believe, I did hear that the riot cops were called here because there was terrorist threats, maybe from white supremacist organizations and things like that, so that's why they were called along with the feds. But I do believe that until violence happened or they were needed, that they should have stayed blocks away, and that they were actually what would cause the violence. I think it could have been prevented if the riot police were not there. So yeah, on the curfews, I think it's different between, Seattle, New York, Philly, Asbury Park, just because they're all very different situations. I personally believe that this is our city, and that a curfew wasn't needed. But again, it was very interesting, and why I said the Asbury Park Police, the curfew was at 8, and for 2 hours, it was very peaceful. People were talking, they weren't forced to go home. Until 10, I think that's when the curfew was decided to be enforced. And I guess I do believe that, what is the harm, and it's only 10 o'clock at night, what if they just stayed to 11 or 12, hearing from their community? Because I think for folks who do believe in police and enjoy police are here to serve us, supposedly. And I think that's what they were doing. They were listening to the community. And I felt like they really could have listened for a few more hours if violence wasn't supposed to happen. So I do, understand curfews is somewhat, if there are terrorist threats and things being called, I guess I could understand that call. But in a democracy, I think we should be able to protest really as long as we would like. I think final thoughts were, I'm really thankful to the organizers that did this. I thought it was also a forum of direct democracy to call a march that was or a rally that was unpermitted, and just a way to be in solidarity with the rest of this resistance around the country. So just thankful to those organizers, and really just thankful to folks who came and took the streets and said, I think we made it clear enough is enough.